I wanted to welcome everyone to the second to last webinar in our fall series of OTF Connect's webinars. This one is entitled New Digital Resources to Support Indigenous Education, K-12 by FNMIEAO. Because we are coming together from across the province, we acknowledge that we are gathered in the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to action stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I just wanted to acknowledge as well that I am a treaty person and that I'm coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the Dish with One Spoon covenant. Now for a few words about today's webinar facilitators. Jody Williams currently works as the Indigenous Education Coordinator for the Studentfriendly Catholic District School Board, as the co-chair for the First Nations, Métis and Inuit Education Association of Ontario. Jody provides educational workshops and develops resources to support Indigenous education in schools. She's also the lead on a provincial community of practice for Indigenous knowledge and mathematics. Tisa Fiddler is Anishinaabe mother of 2 children, and has been an educator for over 20 years. Born and raised in Northwestern Ontario, she considers Onigaming and Muskrat Dam First Nations home, and her family also has historical connections to Kitchener, Mekusib, Inuit territory. She currently lives in Thunder Bay with her family and is the coordinator of Indigenous education with the Thunder Bay Catholic District School Board. Tisa has experience teaching kindergarten through post-secondary education. She's an executive member of the First Nations, Métis and Inuit Education Association of Ontario. And what's not in the website or screen for, I want to recognize the fact that she earned the 2019 Outstanding Indigenous Educator, a distinction awarded by the Canadian Teachers Federation. I could go on, there's lots more to say, but that would eat into our precious time this afternoon together. So I'll make space for our 2 facilitators, Ani Bojo, Jody, and Tisa. And the screen and the mic are yours.
Oh, Miigwetchian. Yeah, Tisa, you're amazing.
Well, yeah, you're only as amazing as the people you have around you. That is really as good as a person is. So everybody around me is as equally amazing. So I'm very grateful to do this work with everyone that has joined us here this evening. I know it's a December evening, 2 weeks before Christmas, and you've taken time to come and share space with us. So I wish we could have tea together. That would be nice, virtually, I guess.
I know if we ever get out of this virtual realm, I think we're like forever stuck in Zoom land, maybe.
I think so.
But we're so delighted to have you here with us. And just to share some of our socials there for Twitter at FNMIEAO, and of course, if you need to connect, there's the email address for this organization, and so we're here today to share with you some new goodies that we're really excited. We've worked very hard over, there's a large number of people that have been part of this work that we just, and we've also switched over to a new domain provider or whatever it's called anyway. So we have a new website with our resources, and that's what we're going to dive into today. But before we get into those resources, let's just talk a little bit about, just so we're all on the same page, and because we're going to think about talking about education specifically, because that's the realm that we all work in. So let's think about, or remind ourselves that colonialism, well, first of all, I want to make it even broader. Colonialism and abrupt climate change go hand in hand. And if we think about the story of Canada here and how Canada comes to be formed, which is a very awful story, where some people here may know the story and some people, maybe this is new learning for you, but the story of how Canada comes to be formed is based on land theft and genocide. Land theft in order to get at the resources, because the resources are what drives the economic wealth. And it's also that violent removal of resources out of the ground is also driving climate change. And so this has been, this is where, the foundation of this is. And so it's important that people really understand when we're talking about the impacts of colonialism, and when we say things like, how do we create safe spaces in our classroom? Well, it's hard to even think about what safety looks like if we don't know what's causing the harm. So this is a little bit of trying to bring some foundational understanding for you today. And so if we think about, here's a couple quotes from Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our object is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic. We must face realistically the fact that the only hope for the Canadian Indian is eventual assimilation into the white race. So I want you to think about that as we talk to you today, about this idea of, the story of Canada has been, genocide takes place in many ways. Of course, there is the outright killing of people, but there's also this slow process, which our education system today is still very much a structure and a system that still perpetuates these ideologies that, a certain way is better than another way. And we're still feeling the effects of what white supremacy and those ideations of whiteness and how that permeates right through, whether it's curriculum even, resources, and how we even teach in our classrooms. And that's what we want to deconstruct with you in order to be able to identify it, in order to then make some transformative changes in our classrooms and schools. Do you want to speak to this one, Lisa?
Yeah, this is a quote. Apologies, we should have probably put like a little, forward that we're starting off heavy hitting. We've done so many of these presentations, and we're beyond the culturally responsive pedagogy. We're right into what is cultural safety and really getting to the root of racism in our system. And we know that this country that is now known as Canada, every one of its major institutions, whether it's justice or healthcare or education, was built on the ideology of racism, of oppression, of white supremacy. And colonial imperialism is the proper term that many scholars are using. So when we think back to our very first prime minister, when we, one of the Confederate fathers, and he talks about, it was the brainchild of what is Indian residential schools, about when children live with its parents, who are savages, and though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training and mode of thought are Indian. And so he will simply become a savage who can read and write. And so that is the idea, that it was forced removal of children, which is actually one of the criteria in the definition of genocide in the United Nations, is that forced removal of children for the purpose of changing them, removing their culture and their language. And so we have to think about, this country and its founding father, one of the founding fathers, founding peoples, I guess, of the concept of the country, because we know that we were not found, but that there was, this very racist thinking around who Indigenous peoples were from the very start. And so all of the laws that were created that would form the government were created with this mindset. And even though people may not have intentionally been racist, they were part of the systemic racist problem. That this is what our education system was based on. And to be learned, to be schooled in institution where leaders had this way of thinking was to be trained in that way. That is, so there is a lot of unlearning that continues to be needed, because we are still seeing this, maybe not in words that are this harsh, but definitely the thinking, the subtleties in the resources that we use, in the training that teachers are getting in the university system.
So we need to, so that if you think about then the impact that this has, and with residential schools, and then to extend that a little bit further, and we think about education today and how it's functioning. So what are we bringing forward? What are we valuing? What are the beliefs and ideologies that are still being perpetuated in our system? What are the images that students see in the classrooms or in the schools, or what are they not seeing? And so all of this ultimately comes down to, so is the impacts of identity, the impacts of feeling like I'm not good enough, or I don't feel like I belong here, or there's something fundamentally wrong with me. These are, these have these deep internalized beliefs that are still very much real today, that are happening today. Mm-hmm. And so we have here some quotes from, residential school survivors, and Tisa is going to share a little bit about this as well.
Jody and I weren't sure if we were going to leave this slide in, but it is something that's been resonating with me often in my own journey as a mother, as an educator, because it was only recently, maybe about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that my own mother, who is a survivor of residential school, she had went to Poplar Hill Indian Residential School, and she apologized to me. I was a 30-year-old new mother, and she apologized to me, and she said that she was sorry for not teaching me the Oji Cree language. She is an Oji Cree person, and she explained to me that she felt that I would be better off in life if I only knew how to speak English. Like it was just it was brainwashing that really happened, where she wasn't allowed to speak. She went to Indian day school up until she was in grade 8, and then she attended high school at the Indian residential school. And the brainwashing that happened, right, where people really truly believed that it was a bad thing, that they were less than because they had the ability to speak their own language fluently. And so she it was almost like an amends that she made with me. And I've never blamed her. I was able to learn my language in other places in the community, but in my home it was not spoken by her until I became older. And so it's just this past weekend, there was an online gathering that was for silent speakers, and it was just so beautiful. It was Christy Belcourt and a team of other people who are committed to revitalizing language, Indigenous language. And so to listen to the thinking that people had around why the language was lost in terms of fluency, I can speak it perfectly in my mind, but it's really difficult to formulate the words. I can absolutely, but I don't consider myself fluent. Yeah. So it's just really, it's impacting families still to this day, and really important that we recognize language. When teachers ask me, how do we indigenize our content? We want to make sure, and we'll talk a bit more about it, that we're not getting into the arts and crafts of Indigenous peoples. Like, we're not making it as superficial, but we get into talking language and land, and incorporating elements of that.
Tisa and Jody, could I just add something?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
So it's just related actually to your comments, Tisa, and also to the quotation that's the expression that's on the screen here, the first one by Agnes. And it was probably 15, it might be 20 years ago. I was in a session with educators, and there was a Mi'kmaq educator, and I apologize, I've forgotten her name. I've written it down somewhere, but she told a story of being a parent, and she said, my relatives, and I'm going to get it wrong, it's either great grandmother or grandmother. Imagine, everyone imagines, when that experience comes of having to send their children to kindergarten, and how, that can be traumatic, stressful, anxiety inducing. And she says, for me, there was an extra layer to that, because she said, even though I knew this wasn't going to happen when I sent my own child, there was this piece in the back of my mind, because she said, I was told the story of my great grandmother having sent, well, it would be a great grandmother, I think, having sent her child to school, essentially kindergarten in Nova Scotia, and her child having her tongue nailed to the desk for speaking her language.
Mm-hmm.
Just thought I'd share that.
Yeah.
And even if we think today too, like, in your schools, what language is offered? Do kids have the opportunity to have access to their languages, or are they forced to take English and French?
Mm-hmm.
Think about these things. And so what are we doing in terms of the restoration work that needs to be happening? So if we think about our schools, and we want to make our schools places that are safe, where children feel valued, where they see themselves, let's take a moment and look at this image here, and let's use the chat box. So this is a common image we see in education, used all the time for maps. Can anybody guess how many nations can you identify? And don't worry, this isn't like don't worry if you're, just guess. Don't worry about being right or wrong. Let's just see what numbers people come up with. What do you see? Put your guess in the chat. No guesses? Hey, here we go. Okay, 50, 200, more than 30, 99, 35, 79, more than 50, 600, too many to count, 600 plus, 75. Okay, now I can't even keep up. All right, so I guess we can safely say that nobody really knows for sure. Well, what do we teach in schools? What are kids learning when we teach this map in schools? Maybe they're learning that this is Canada here, and this down here is the United States. Maybe they're learning, they see this map, they learn about provinces and cities and towns. Yeah. So where's the Anishinaabe Nation? So if the Anishinaabe Nation exists, which it does, Why don't we see it on a map? Where's the Haudenosaunee Confederacy lands and territories? How about the Mushkegowuk?
Mhm.
Isn't that interesting? So do you see how just simply by erasing people off a map, it's actually another form of colonialism and racism? Because you don't even, when we talk about what do kids see and not see,
Yeah.
sometimes it's so obvious, but unless you come from the nation that's being erased, you can easily not even realize the damage that just showing a map of Canada can do. So these are the things we want you to start to be thinking about, right? Is to colonialism it's elusive, it's pervasive, it's so deeply entrenched. That's why a lot of people, when we do these presentations, are like, I didn't know this. And then the next thing that follows is, how is it possible I didn't know any of this? Well, that's how good colonialism is. It's so powerful that an entire country of people can be bamboozled by it and not even know that what's going on is actually happening. Like, how many people here can articulate how genocide is still occurring across these lands? And so if you can't, that's part of the education that we need to still be going on. And, you know, before we act, we have to take the time to sit and listen and do the learning. I know as educators, we are trained to kind of like learn and then do something the next day. But with this, sometimes you have to take that time to do this learning because it's deep. There's a lot of layers to it. So it's important that you're doing that. And the other thing I want to differentiate too is that what you learn as an adult, and this is, I mean, we're coming at you really heavy. We will move off of heaviness and get into some other stuff. But for you, you know, we're as adults, we can take on the heavy learning, but it's important that we differentiate what we teach out to students, right? Like, we're not in the business of traumatizing kids to get truths out. So sometimes, because what I've seen is that people engage in this learning and then they go and they teach it right into a classroom. So we have to be careful on that as well. And we're going to show you some of these lessons that have been developed that talk about how to talk about genocide in your classroom, how to talk about these things, but being very mindful and very age appropriate, and readiness is super important around that. So thinking about our education system then today. So as I mentioned, whose language are we still learning in education? Whose histories are being taught? Did you hear about Johnny MacDonald, both sides of the story there? Or do you just hear the side where he was like this amazing guy who did all these great things and built Canada? So we have to be very, you know, very cautious over what side of the, like, you know, we've only been given one side being taught, and we're trying to change that. Whose knowledge systems are valued? Our education system values Western science. Well, what about Indigenous knowledge systems that have been here for like thousands of years? I mean, if you think about science, it's like this, you know, it's kind of new on the block. It's a new knowledge system that's kind of come about versus things that have been here for thousands of years. So we have to start to recognize how these power imbalances have happened and that are also perpetuated in the classroom. Anything you wanted to share about this one, Tisa? You're on mute.
Sorry, my husband came in here and he's like, "Oh, this looks great." And he didn't realize that I was.
Which part were we on? Was it just going on? He's like, "Oh, wait."
No, he was talking about something. All right, so I muted. Yeah, no, I think that you covered it all, Jody. It really is about always having a critical lens about the resources that we are going to, the resources that we are using being provided in our classrooms, depending on even which board you are in. Sometimes, you know, we have to look at things with more of a critical lens. Jody and I both work in the Catholic school board system. So some of the material, we have to be very thoughtful about how we are supporting the implementation and how the implementation happens. So always.
Yeah, and I see here in the chat box, somebody had mentioned nativeland.ca. So again, just be mindful as well. And you'll notice on that website, they have a huge disclaimer right up front, right? So you have to, the best thing to do is you make those relationships with the local communities of wherever you're at, and you seek the information directly from those community members, the language speakers, those who are recognized that have had not so much of an interference from colonialism as because as much as, I think that resource does a good job in terms of showing the multiple layers and the challenges with applying a Western format of mapping with these lines that draw boundaries versus pre-contact ideas of mapping were not the same at all, like in terms of boundaries, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate, right? So don't take that as, and that's what you have to kind of do with everything. Don't take things as like the absolute truth as it's presented. So I just wanted to make that little disclaimer about that, just to be conscious of that, because I know that there's still some inaccuracies, and it does say that on the map, like it's a work in progress. Okay, so we're going to dive into our new website here, and we're going to show you a few things that are new. We do have, so many school boards actually have board licenses. So like, for example, my school board, teaches school boards, and lots of others. I would recommend checking in with if you're in a school board, check in with your Indigenous education lead to see if you have a license to use the site. If not, there is an individual membership fee, and it's also free for anyone who's from a First Nation community as well. So there's a section here where you can log in, and then in there you can see this section here, which is members only. But first I'm going to take you to this part here, because this is where our new resources are. So let's dive in. So we're going to play you this video. My goodness. And look at the time. We never have enough time. What time does this go till? 6.
Till 6, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we do have time. All right. So this video that I'm going to play for you, it's created, there are members of our Elders Advisory Council on here, as well as other recognized community members and knowledge keepers and such. And we wanted to get their voices to tell, to send the message out in education. What is it that you want to see? Because ultimately this was the purpose behind the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? When the survivors said we want to have this TRC because we want people to know the truth. We want people to know what happened, because in many cases, maybe residential schools are closed, but the genocide is still occurring. The harm is still happening. We have families that are being pulled out of their homes in very violent ways happening, just this week. Out of their homelands. Like there's still a lot of things that are going on. We need to know the truth. And then the other part of that is there's truth telling, but what we don't want to see happening is this heavy lean on what we call romance. This heavily, because this is very prevalent in education as well as other areas of society, is this romanticized notion of who people think Indigenous peoples are or about. And so we get oftentimes, and again, this is all done with good intention. So this isn't about people's intentions, right? Nobody's waking up in the morning and thinking, okay, I'm going to make a really harmful activity and just, make kids feel awful. No, of course not. But so we have to park the intention over here to the side, right? It's not about intention. It's about impact, and really asking ourselves these hard questions. How do I know what I'm doing is having a positive impact? Do I know? Or is it possible that it's having a negative impact on students? And so we put this together to try and be a little bit of a guide. And we'll talk about some kind of do's and don'ts as well to try and make it a little simpler. But anyway, let's play the video.
I think what a lot of teachers do when they come into teaching is they have this vision that they have all these young people, and with visions and dreams and hopes. And I think that a teacher wants to really empower children and young people to fulfill their dreams and hopes.
So in relation to teachers hearing these tellings that are being put forward and maybe acting upon them themselves, it's very important that we stay true to the original telling of what's being related, and that these stories, these tellings, all these things, they come from a cultural perspective, and they originate in a cultural context. And you take that out of the cultural context, and then you're adding your own influence to whatever it is that's being said. And there'll be misunderstandings there, and there'll be misconnections, and also confusion.
Without knowing what we're doing, because you're going to create more harm than good. And it's really important that we know what we're doing, because we're messing up that little one. We're really messing up that little one if we don't know what we're doing. We hope that they're going to be taught well, and that they're not going to be getting these some teachers saying, well, I took Indigenous knowledge, and I got a degree in whatever, and land-based Anishinaabe stuff, and I can teach it. No, you can't.
To me, I think you need to welcome our elders into the classroom. They are the knowledge keepers. They are the ones that are passing on the knowledge to our youth and our future.
The lands and the truth about us as Anishinaabe people, we are the keepers of this land. And without the treaties, there is no Canada. And that's a fact.
The first peoples who were here, Indigenous peoples, we're nations. And there are probably about 40, across this country, about 40 genuine nations of Indigenous peoples, of First Peoples, who have our own languages, we have our own cultures, we have our own traditions. And the reason that Canada exists in a peaceful way is because the Indigenous peoples who were here first, the First Nations peoples, those 40 nations, agreed by treaty in most cases. We agreed to share the use of all these lands, without which peaceful settlement could never have taken place.
I was dealing with lawyers, and I explained the treaty from the Aboriginal perspective, and those lawyers told me, after I taught them, they told me that they never learned that in university. So I think it's really important, if the teachers are going to teach it, that they have a true understanding of what the treaties mean.
The government has taken this position that everything is just theirs automatically. And remember the original agreement? It was to share. And we haven't changed any of that agreement. That two-row wampum is as good today as it was back then. And how many times do people have to be reminded that this is the agreement? The agreement is we're sharing with you. We're sharing with you our resources. And we don't have the same idea about ownership that you do. We have sustainability. And in the way that you're thinking about it, you may be wondering, well, what's the big fuss? Why is there land back lane? Why is there all of this disruption in British Columbia with the pipelines? Well, it's because pipelines are, again, going through the territory, pristine territory, with this pipeline, and we all know, do we not, the pipeline's right. We've got these demonstrations going on, and these demonstrations is about land. It's about land, again, where we had agreements.
We're in really strange times when Anishinaabe or Haudenosaunee or Mushkegowuk people think about it. We find ourselves actually being in a position where we feel we're negotiating for our human rights with governments. No other group of people in Canadian society have to do that, but we have to have a United Nations declaration, as a standard by which all of the countries in the world have agreed to uphold the rights of Indigenous peoples. We don't understand why we need that sort of a statement, but we're glad it's there, because it enables us to hold political leaders in countries like Canada accountable if our rights are not being respected, as is often and unfortunately usually the case.
The truth has to be told. There's stuff that you want to protect our kids. Like myself, I want to protect our kids, but I also want them to know their history of what Canada did to us. They have to know that there was a time where we had to ask for permission to leave the reserve. There was a time where there was no welfare. There was a time when we were just rationed. And that time, we were very, very struggling people. And we had all this land, all these resources, billions and trillions of dollars being taken away from our people, but yet we were the poorest ones. And if you look at some of the First Nations now, we're still in that boat. We're still in that boat of where's our next house going to come from. We can't drink the water. We get sores from showering in this water. But yet we're able to provide a pipeline across Canada for oil. But yet we can't put lines into the communities for our drinking water.
It's important that certainly in 2021 that everybody enjoys the same opportunities to have the same quality of services and healthcare and education and justice as everybody else. We know from some of the unfortunate headlines that we see in every day in our newspapers that even in progressive democracies like Canada, that those rights are not always respected. We are the people who often find ourselves the victims of police being targeted by police agencies. Our children in schools tend to be suspended or disciplined more often. Our children are more likely to be apprehended by childcare agencies in this country. It's more difficult for us to get housing in many of our communities.
The governmental system has just come here to this country and made a declaration, a terra nullius declaration, to say, oh, this is a doctrine of discovery. We own it all. Do you? No, you don't. That's the truth. And so you need to be looking at those things to say, we didn't ask for your religion. We didn't ask for it to be imposed upon us.
our people through the process of colonization have a lot of horrendous things happen to them, and the process of genocide that has been perpetrated on our people is an ongoing thing. And don't ever let anybody say that it was in the past. This process of genocide, it's still happening right now. It's still alive and well, and racism is still alive and well in this country and in this world.
So I think that teachers have a big responsibility in changing things and in making things better, which is, it's not my job to fix Canada. It's Canada's job to fix Canada. And it starts with parents and teachers. We have to change the narrative. We have to start detrenching out of this colonization because it's impacting everybody. And so teachers have a huge responsibility. So I would say not to teach Indigenous culture, but to also detrench out of colonization and bring your classroom with you.
Today in modern times, there's so much technology and attention focused on the social media out there. There's so many things that distract us and keep us disconnected from ourselves. So it's really important that we stay connected to the land, to the water, to the trees, and all those things out there that's on the land.
This land is going to be here forever. And that's why we look after it. Well, we're water and land protectors. We're not extremists. We're not. We look after this land. That's what we were told. We were brought down here to look after this land, and that's what we intend to do.
We are living in some very important time. We need to combine the traditional way of teachings to the academic way of teachings. Try to reach as a medium, an acceptable way of looking at the two ways to create a new form of teachings.
We live in a place, in a society where it's different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're in climate change. And so I think that, teachers, really need to teach about that. That has to be the one of the primary things that we're teaching young people are the solutions to climate change.
And for teachers too that are addressing Aboriginal children, I'd say empower our children. It is time. I'd say to the teachers, empower our children. They really need it because the generational impact is there. So working together is always a very important thing, especially for our children who desperately need it today. And I think that education, we have to start to get out of the box versus inside the box in the classroom. There is a lot to learn on the outside world. There's a lot to learn from the earth. There's a lot to learn from these plants that we have, the flowers that we have. There's a lot you could teach. You could use your curriculums, bring it outside and use it.
And so teachers can make a big impact and a big difference. And they have so much power because they have all these young minds to shape and to encourage and to foster and to, what's the possible, which is change. Teachers can actually really make a change by impacting these students in a good way.
So hopefully this video helps provide you some context and direction in which we're hoping to take education. And so a couple other pieces that are in here that go along with this video. And these are things like you can utilize these right off the website. You can download the guide. We do ask though It's one thing to use them in your own professional practice, but there is copyrights on them. So it's not, so please don't share them out or do outside, use them in ways that is outside the realm of your own direct classroom instruction. You need to have permission for that. Sometimes we find our content not in its entirety. It's like there's pieces of it without permissions being asked. And that's also another good practice too, because this happens a lot when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, is nobody's asking. Like, did you ask permission to share, especially when you're talking about, especially with cultural knowledge, we really want those pieces to be done by Indigenous peoples. So, you know, oftentimes people are hearing something or they read something and then they're reproducing it or replicating it in a classroom. But did you even ask for permission? Was that even allowed to be done like that? Or are you citing your sources? So this is why we also say, be careful what's on the internet, because there's a lot of weird things that to the to somebody who doesn't have a good critical lens to really know what's real and what's not. There's a lot of weird things out there that get attributed, especially with the Romanticism, get attributed to Indigenous people. So one, like, I don't know if you ever heard the story of the two wolves. It's like, oh, there's this Cherokee story. I don't know, sometimes it changes whoever it's attributed to, but this idea of these two wolves and one's a good wolf and one's a bad wolf. And anyway, it goes on about who are you, which wolf are you? Anyway, that was actually from a sermon. So you got to be very careful out there. So all of our, so back to this slide that you're looking at here. So this is a slide deck that we created, and we made it self-directed. So it's self-directed learning for you to go through. So we have a previous video that we've done in our words to kind of understand the context in terms of colonialism. The other piece here that we wanted to emphasize is there's a difference between, as Indigenous peoples, we're not equity-seeking groups. Oftentimes we're lumped under equity-seeking, but there's a difference. And so there's Indigenous rights, which is like separate from human rights. So everybody has human rights, but there's these are distinct rights that come from the fact that there are nations of people who've always existed here. And so what does that look like in education? It looks like, you know, making sure we have seats at the decision-making tables, making sure we have full jurisdiction and control over decision matters with relation to Indigenous education. So we're starting to see some changes, like school boards are developing policies to ensure those rights are being adhered to and things like that. So these go into, we do a whole big thing, and there's a lesson I'm going to talk about in a minute connected to the UNDRIP. We want you to familiarize yourself with the UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And there's a, here you can click on these. This is more of a student-friendly version. There's a video here for you. There's more videos on the next slide deck to really dive in and understand that more. And basically it's setting out the minimum standard. And if you heard what was being said in the video before, like there is nonstop human rights abuses happening all the time still today, and even in the classroom. Remember when I said about intention and impact? Well, if you're ever faced with a human rights litigation, the judge will not even consider impact, or sorry, intention. I mean, it is only about what was the impact. What was the harm caused? So you can't say, oh, but I didn't mean to. So we have to be very, very careful. And we, you know, we also have educators, we have an ethical and legal duty to make sure that we are doing things in a right way. So that's what these slides are designed for you. And then, you know, what does this look like in the classroom? So these are some of the things, right, that we, you know, myself and Tisa and others in the work that we do in school boards that we're really trying hard to address, because we're seeing these all the time under the umbrella of good intention. And we're also hearing back from students. And you'll hear in here, there is student voice in here as well, and they share their experiences in the classroom. And so these are opportunities to learn and to change classroom practice. And again, this isn't about shame or guilt, or it's just recognizing that we're all victims here of a system that was designed very strategically to advance the goals of colonialism. We're all caught up in that. So how do we become, I really always equate it to, the movie The Matrix, when, I don't know, are you guys all as old as I am? Maybe not. You should watch the movie anyway, it's a classic. But in The Matrix, Neo, the main character, is given this choice. Do you want to see the world for what it actually is, or live in this like facade fantasy of what you think it is? And so that's what this is about for non-Indigenous people. This is about coming to a realization about it's not what we think it is. And so once we start to see it, then we can start to change it and address it. So these are some of these pieces in here. I know I want to be mindful of time, we don't have time to go through all of them, but these are, you can play these and you can hear students share their story about their experiences in classrooms. And then what are some of the strategies and recommendations on how to make sure that we're not doing that, or maybe we have been doing that, and how do we change our practice? So that's what, so there's all kinds of these examples and student voice that are in here. And I want to recognize those students for having, because it's not necessarily either a safe space for kids to speak up either. Because if you think about in our education systems, there's a power dynamic going on as well. We're adults and they're youth. And so sometimes, and that's what, when we listen to the students, that's what they talk about. They tell us about how, they don't feel safe speaking up or out about what's happening. And so, and a lot of them also talk about, they can sense that something doesn't sit right or feel right, but they don't necessarily have the language to name what's going on as well. So we wanted to bring this, this is one of our priorities that we wanted to do in working with these new resources, to try and bring educators along to start to see these things that are happening and how do we make those changes. The other side to this, and we heard this loud and clear as well from our Elders Council, is that we need to, yes, we got to be telling truths. But when I say truths, again, because I know it's K-12 in here, it's age appropriate, it's scaffolded, it's readiness. Again, as adults, we can do a lot of heavy truth learning, but we want to be very mindful on how we relay that back into our classrooms. But to coincide with that is also thinking about, are we bringing in examples of brilliance, joy, contributions, excellence? And so, and the other thing too, is we hear oftentimes, I don't know what to teach. I'm afraid to teach something. I don't want to get it wrong. Well, just do contributions then for now. You can take, there's so many things you can talk about. For example, oh, sorry, this thing is a little bit, there we go. You can talk about, for example, let's see what's in here. We've got culinary, I believe. Oh, we got an interactive slide deck here for other, that links to other things in terms of contributions. Culinary artists, Indigenous authors, there's a whole slide deck on there. All of these slide decks are downloadable as well. Indigenous journalists, artists, athletes, chefs, so I mentioned that, influencers, land defenders and water protectors, veterans, Indigenous veterans, innovations, inventions. There is so much in here. And hopefully this is just, gives you some ideas depending on your grade and what you're teaching, to what else can you, who else can you learn about? And think about what's on our walls and what's not on our walls. What are students seeing? And not just for Indigenous students to see themselves represented. I mean, that is important, yes, but all students should see positive representations of people in their classrooms and in their schools. So there's other areas of different things for contributions and things like that are all in here as well. The other thing I'm going to quickly talk about is these new secondary resources that are done. So we'll pop over here. So you'll notice again on the website under public resources, there's elementary and secondary. So I'm gonna speak to the secondary, and then I'm gonna put it back over to Tisa to talk about the elementary, and then it connects back to an original one of our original resources. In the chat, I see, will we get these slides? Yes, they're right here. You just go to the website and you click on them. There's a download link, or you can use them direct off the website. Okay, so secondary resources. So these have, again, you can download the lesson plan. And in the lesson plan, so this one, for example, is teaching about United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And if you scroll down, you'll see what we did is, instead of doing, a geography lesson plan, for example, we did lesson plans that are multi-curriculum connected. So each of them have like all the different areas that you can connect this lesson into. So when you click on the link, so I'm going to click on the link to show you what happens. So up pops this PDF. You can download it. And then it tells you who Erica Zombalas and Sarah Murdoch were the creators and advised by Nancy Rowe for this lesson. And in here, you will see there are other links to things like downloadable slide decks, interactive digital activities that connect to the learning for each of these lessons. So this lesson is around getting people familiar with the UNDRIP, and there's a series of news articles that you can show either digitally, or you can print them off if you like the old school version of paper, and having kids look at current issues and then aligning them with what are the articles of the UNDRIP that apply here for these articles. So it's also that we're talking about critical literacy skills, the ability to analyze and articulate. There are video links related to the learning concepts that are outlined in these lessons. So this is this UNDRIP articles activity that I was mentioning. So this is just to give you a little snippet, a little snapshot on what it looks like. So let's go back. There's one on teaching about colonialism. So again, there's a timeline that they can explore and see these sequences of events. So again, same idea. There's a lesson plan that has multiple links to other downloadable slide decks as well. You can see all the course connections. This one is teaching about genocide. So looking at the 10 stages of genocide and having them really come to an understanding of realizing what is happening, what's happened and what's still happening that constitutes genocide. And so I come from the secondary background, and I can say that, kids are just filled with such good energy. And when you can direct them into, these social justice or action projects, they're just powerful. You don't even have to, as the teacher, you can let them decide on where they want to go. Every time I've been, teaching this kind of content in classrooms, I bring forward the information, but the students are the ones who really take it to life and are so passionate about putting those calls to justice and action forward. So there is another lesson that's almost ready, and we'll put it on there, and it is on social justice activities. It just had to get tweaked. So it will be coming up here. So these are those secondary resources, and I will now go to the elementary.
That was brilliant, Judy. I'm always just so impressed by the work that educators do across the province.
Mhm.
Really is. And Jody is a fearless leader, and she's able to hustle up a pretty solid crew. And I know that there are many, many amazing leaders, you know, across this country in Indigenous education, and we're just very privileged to be able to work with the FNMIEAO. So I will talk about this resource. It's a couple of years old, but it is still such an incredible source of video and recommendations for learnings in the classroom. It was created. It was a small grant that our association had received after the revisions to the social studies grades 4 to 6 and the grade 7 and 8 history and grade 10 history was done in 2016, I believe. And that was in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Commission. I believe it was called, or Calls to Action. And I believe it was 64 or 65 about creating relevant curriculum. And so the association, I was fairly new to the association, and but we started this project, and I suggested to Jody that we come north. I am in Thunder Bay, and you know, the land of the Anishinaabe people, and but I'm a visitor here, and you know, my family, my ancestors are from what is now Treaty 9 area and around Lake of the Woods, and Treaty 9 and the far north, and Treaty 3 around Lake of the Woods. So I said, let's travel, let's go and visit knowledge keepers in those communities. And so this guide was created to support primarily the grade 5, grade 4 and 5, and grade 5. But it fits into the early civilizations unit with grade 4, and then the treaty impact, and later it's really a grade 4 to 6. And the videos actually are videos that can be used at any grade level from 4 to 12. And we recognize, you know, the attention span of students, so we try to keep them between 4 and 6 minutes. I think the longest one might be about 9 minutes. So we traveled up to Kitchener-Magozib, was one of the communities we visited, you know, elders in that community who were medicine harvesters. They had a lot of knowledge of the land. You know, the one elder had, he'd actually been born in a moss teepee. He was a builder of moss teepees. If we're looking at science and technology or structures, you know, the science that goes into building a moss teepee. You know, it wasn't made out of hide. It was literally made out of birch bark and moss, and a certain type of moss. And he talked about that. And then we got into, you know, interviews and conversations with the leadership. And in Kitchener-Magozib and Inuit, they were the first and really the only First Nation chief and council that were jailed for protecting their land. So over 10 years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, the chief and council, they were protecting their land, refusing to they were refusing to hand over or complete documents that showed where traditional trap lines were, or traditional living areas were in that region, to a mining company. And the mining company, you know, sued them. The government charged them, and they refused. It was just an incredible show of resistance and protection. They really were like land protectors, and they were jailed, and nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about how this was happening already 15 years ago. Anyways, that the mining company ended up pulling out and sued both the community and the Ontario government, and the Ontario government paid the mining company out millions upon millions of dollars. And taxpayers don't, talk about that. Like children, the average person doesn't learn about how people who are violating our land are actually being paid to, for these violations that they are committing. So there is a great video on geography, early settlements and structures. So we were in Kichinemegozip. We were also in Onigaming, and in Onigaming.
Hey, Tisa,
yeah.
I want to show a little snippet of the geography one. It's so beautiful. Let's just do a little snippet of it.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Yes.
Like, think about grade 9 geography as well, right? Like, this is where it can be there's multiple ways you could use
We're called Kichinemegozip Inuit, which translates from the Ojibwe Cree language, which is our native tongue. It means the people of Big Trout Lake. So we're situated in the middle of the boreal forest, about 600 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, and just within the Hudson Bay lowlands.
There's about 28 rivers that flow into Big Trout. And every river that flows into Big Trout gives life to this lake.
The reason why people, stayed in this area was plentiful, like fish was plentiful that time, still is. Plus the hunting was pretty good here because every season there's a different kind of animals that come by.
We have pristine lands, pristine waters, and we can drink out of the lake still.
We have to keep our lake not just for us, but for everybody.
So beautiful. So those three people, Chief Donnie Morris, Daryl Sinawap, Jack McKay, they were all part of the KI6 they are referred to. They had been jailed. Donnie was the chief then, Daryl was just a young man, Jack McKay, they were all jailed. There was a grandmother who was sent to jail for 3 months. They were sentenced to 6 months. So, and they are still in positions of leadership in the community, and we need to absolutely, talk about this more, about the beauty of the land and the importance of protecting it. And it ties in so beautifully to what is happening at Wet'suwet'en right now, the protecting of that natural land. And then we moved to Onigaming, and it was really, it was really cold. It was like minus 50. We were there for ceremonies for the weekend, and just recording, documenting, being in ceremony with the elders and knowledge keepers there. And so they shared the worldview piece, the traditional teachings, their understandings of what relationship with spirit is. And spirit is really everything around us. It is the land, it is the water. All of those elements have spirit in our understanding. So,
and the other reason why we built this up the way it was is because, we don't want teachers to be teaching or speaking on behalf of cultural knowledge or Indigenous knowledge. So if you can't, you're number one, first of all, always number one, try and bring somebody in to speak for themselves. But if you can't, we recognize not everybody can bring an elder in or a community member. So we designed it in such a way that you could bring it in through this video. And then you as the teacher, you draw out all those different, connections. What are you noticing here? What do you see? Why is the water important to you where you live? What can you do to make sure that we have clean water in 50 years from now, 100 years from now? So it's all about drawing those connections as well. Okay. I just wanted to say that. So back over to you, Tisa.
No, it's true. Thanks, Jody. It is really important. You know, we can all we can all absolutely motivate, activate. We want to create children or support children in becoming change agents. And that's what we land protectors, you know. So we are in we are in critical times right now with our climate, and it really has to do with land and protection of land and water. And so if we're able to bring traditional knowledge into our classrooms, and all of these elders and knowledge keepers that shared in these videos, they support that. They recognize the importance of having this knowledge in classroom. And it's not ceremony, you know, they're you know, it's not that like you're bringing in a smudge bowl, you're not bringing in eagle feathers. These are the stories of our people. This is the knowledge of our people, and that can be shared. That can be shared. And Jody said, yes, bringing in community partners is ideal, and somebody also said with COVID, we can't, but also, you know, our community partners are tired. They're really, you know, our elders and knowledge keepers, because there's this renaissance, this, you know, it's almost like it's coming back alive. And so everybody, they're in such high demand. And so we need to be gentle with them as well. Went into Chapleau Cree, which is north of Sudbury, and you know, these are the Mushkegowuk Cree people from the coast, and talked about, you know, that relationship with land, the harvesting, focusing on the harvesting, and the language and the treaty area there as well. Yeah, these are really beautiful. And then we were down with Ray John from the Oneida Nation, and he really wanted to work with Indigenous language and the Oneida language, and so he created some resources. So we did create a student guide. We know teachers love student guides. We definitely you know, recommend using this, but also encourage teachers to go beyond, just, you know, stretch the conversation. Multiple launch points for inquiry in those videos. And so each of the units are broken down into themes. What we did was we went through the curriculum document and pulled out all the sample questions. And we know the sample questions were created very thoughtfully by Indigenous partners in the writing teams. I know that because I was part of the writing teams, and it was really important that we put in sample questions to help guide teachers with facilitating the learning. So the themes are based on those. There is great information, background information on each of the nations that we went to. There's maps, the curriculum links. It is grade 5, correct, Jody?
Is that bad? I forget now. Is it 4
and
5 or just 5?
Years. I know we bring this back like once a year to present on it. I'm pretty sure it is grade 5.
Grade 5, yeah. But yeah, you can see, hopefully you can, that was kind of like to be very specific, but hopefully by now you're seeing just all kinds of connections that you can draw to. And again, like these activities here. So this is the teacher guide in its entirety. And then you notice there's a French version. So there's a French guide as well, all in French. And then on the website, if we go back over, so you have all of these, right? So it tells you like, watch Norma Caldwell's video, Moose Cree, and then answer the questions. Although I'm not a big like fan of like, you know, filling in worksheets. However, sometimes they have a place and a purpose. So sometimes it's helpful to, you know, guide in that watching of the video. And then it says, you know, watch Kitchemegeagusub in Innuwag. relationships to land and water. So you watch that one, you watch another one, and then there'll be little activities to think about where do some of your people come from, if you know. And if you don't know where your people come from, maybe you can learn about other people, where they come from. And then we get into roles and responsibilities. So again, it's always about the connecting back and making it relevant to you or to the student as an individual, as opposed to, trying to mimic or replicate something. So that's kind of the big piece that we lean on with this. So back on the main site, so we converted these. So we have the main guide, and then we also know that sometimes it's nice and easy for teachers just to have a direct fillable form. So these are, you can download these and they're fillable. So you could put it into your digital classroom. And so we've just separated them out. So you can see, you can type your answer directly.
I forgot about that.
I know. So they've been separated out for you as well. And again, same for the French. Oh,
and so
sorry.
The French videos are not, they're subtitled in French. So they are not like the speaking, the audio is not in French, but it is subtitled in French.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing to point to, and again, there's another little component that is not quite done with this, and we are going to build onto this. So this is our first one, but was to look at the land as our teacher. So this, and again, it's a slide deck that you can use directly off the website, but thinking about how to, so what can we learn from the land? And again, try not to, you don't have to be Indigenous, and you don't have to try and over indigenize something for the sake of trying to make it Indigenous. Just go out on the land, just as a human being, and connect that learning. That's so important. Just by doing that process and getting kids recognizing how special the land and the water and all of creation is, that in itself is an act of reconciliation, because ultimately we want to have everyone being in love with the land and the waters, so that everyone will change their beliefs and values and ideologies. Because currently right now our society operates very much from the position of take, extract, money. And we got to change that. So again, in here, there's beautiful little videos, people sharing about the importance of Indigenous knowledge systems and what they have to offer. A little, a note about, we don't have time to go into it, but, thinking about, again, colonialism and how have things like Western science, and, I come from a science background, I love science, but science has also been used as a weapon. Like I think about when I was doing my science training, all I heard about were dead white guys as being like these, the epitome of science and math discoveries. And then I find out later on, oh, that's not true. That was just, one narrative that made it in. There's that hierarchy or that white supremacy narrative that negated all of these other people who've had significant contributions, or in some cases, other people discovered or something, and a white person took credit for it. So there's lots of that. Anyway, so these subjects aren't neutral. And so how can we, again, think about the value of Indigenous knowledge and what it has to, and what it can offer. So this is a video of Isaac Murdoch going through the process of making fish pemmican. And what we're almost done with is we have a chart that we're working on, and it'll have all, it shows links K-12 to the curriculum, to science and math, and a whole bunch of sample inquiry questions from watching this video. And then some other ones that down the road in the future, we hope to embed as well. We have one on birch bark canoe that's in the process of making. So,
and Jody does this in her free time.
Spare time.
In all your spare time.
So I think that was the other one here, I really think we'll have to rename this because this is deceiving. It is an initiative. So we've been leading something called the Indigenous Knowledge and Mathematics Community of Practice. And we just launched this new resource as well that's linked here, Lessons from Beyond. So you can access the resource here. And this resource is actually a part 3 of something originated that was called Lessons from the Earth. So, oh, look. Okay, so I just discovered that link is broken, so we'll have to fix that. It should link to, maybe Ian or Tisa, one of you can put into the chat box, lessons from earth and beyond.ca. So we'll have to fix that link in there. This one, primary lessons from the earth, is there's a whole thing for primary kids in there. And then lessons from beyond is our recent iteration, which is learning from the stars. And so there's all kinds of little goodies in there that's got math activities, curriculum connected math activities. We don't have time to go through them, but you can go in here and check it all out as well. And then, as I mentioned, there's a whole section, members only section in here with other things as well as our past webinars and stuff like that. So I see we're coming to the end of time, and I just want to pop back over here just to kind of in summary. So kind of like the do's and don'ts, right? So we want to avoid mimicking, replicating, things like that. Make it this about making connections, looking for bringing in truths or contributions, treaty education, history, geography, the facts. That's what we want teachers focusing on, not the cultural side, because that's where we get into a lot of the tokenizing and minimizing, with good intentions, of course, but that's where we want, we want people to move out of that space. That's been very prevalent in our schools, and kids, who sit in those classrooms with those intended teachers are not feeling good about who they are, especially kids that are really strong in their, if they're an Anishinaabe student and they go to ceremony and they have a strong understanding of their cultural background, and then they sit in a classroom where a teacher is like, I'm going to talk about 7 grandfathers today based on, the Google that I got it off of. It's that student is going to feel like it's not going to sit right, and it's actually causing harm. So that's why we say bring Indigenous people in to speak to those, and for the rest, for teachers, for the non-Indigenous teachers, stay on the side of bringing in the information. Remember, I said the map, like the fact that we're not even, the Anishinaabe as an example is not even on the map. We need help with that, right? We want people knowing that there's an Anishinaabe nation, that there are nations of people. Let's work on that, and leave the cultural and those spiritual elements to the families and the people to which they come from. So, and ultimately, we always tell people, if you're not sure, just ask, reach out and ask. Every school board has an Indigenous education lead. We'll share with you again our contact information for our association. And I think we have a couple minutes for questions.
Can I just add, Jody? That we work very closely with the Elder Council. I just saw a slide of them up. But that was some of the feedback that we received at our meeting just last week, was that we need to absolutely tell the truth. We need to talk about, the horror of the history, but we have to ensure that people recognize, that students recognize that is not all that we are about. Like, we are not only a tragedy, and some teachers, because they are just so moved and they're just grief stricken as well, they sometimes get stuck there, because it becomes a familiar story, and it's processing that story, it's telling it repeatedly, year after year. So really recognizing your own professional practice, you tell the story, but you also have to balance that narrative. You have to talk about those positive contributions. You have to celebrate, you know, Indigenous peoples and the knowledge systems that continue to thrive, that have survived, not just survived, but they're thriving. And, you know, somebody had asked a question in here about that, the grade 9 Indigenous art course, the NAC 1.0. One of the teachers that I work with here at Thunder Bay Catholic, they really use that that course to discuss some of the human rights issues that Indigenous peoples are facing. So they do explore some of the, you know, the art concepts, traditional art concepts. They talk about Norval Morrisseau's art. They bring in other artist forms, Christy Belcourt, but then they also they talk about, you know, Orange Shirt Day, or they the murder missing Indigenous women and girls, and it becomes, again, you know, a space for kids to create artworks that are activism, right? It is a form of activism. So
yeah, so trying not to, it's not about paint like Morrisseau. It's not about trying to copy an artist. It's looking at those big themes: identity, relationships, you know, connection to land, sovereignty, those, and then how do we use that medium, that or artworks, to convey those learning and understandings. So we've done a lot of shifting in that. But so the short answer is we don't really have a whole lot of resources for NAC scenario. We need to, we have them, I think we have, like, locally boards have them, we have them for our own board, but there's quite a process when we do put things out, because all of our materials has to go through this extreme vetting process with our elders council. And if you can imagine, that takes time. So things that we share out have gone through that big process of vetting, so that, you know, you can be confident that what we're putting out is accurate, it's relevant, it's meaningful, and it's been vetted. Was there some, I thought I saw another question flying by in the chat box, but.
Yeah, there was, I think I answered a couple. People, there were some questions about whether they can use the resources. Absolutely. So just to clarify, Jody had said, you know, like, in certain situations, you should not use them. So use them in your classrooms. You know, use them in its entirety, but not to take it outside. Like, say you're doing your own PD. Because then people will pick and choose parts and create their own presentation. So, you know, and reaching out to, if this PD, you know, is wanted within your board, or you think it would be a good fit, and you want to figure out how to use the resource, reach out to us. I put the website to, or the email address, info@FNMIEAO. So please use the resource. That's why it's created.
Okay. Maybe I'll just I'll use that as an opportunity just to close and offer, just pick up on your comment, Tisa and Jody, about the tragedy piece, and, you know, recognizing that Indigenous peoples are current peoples, not just people of the past, and that they are triumphant and a triumph, not just a tragedy. So I think you've reminded us of that and underscored so many incredible resources for educators. I know every time I connect with you and have the privilege and honor of working on the, you know, behind the scenes with you, that I learn incredible nuggets of information that just deepen my own knowledge. And I think that's true of everyone on the call today, and that we'll have an opportunity to look at the archived webinar for the next month. You can see lots of things populating certainly the chat here and throughout, where people have been most appreciative of the work that you've done. So I'll just end by saying chi miigwech, and we look forward to an opportunity to continue working together, because I know that we will. So with that, I'll just bid everyone a good night, and thanks to everyone for joining. I know this is for everyone, including Tisa and Jody. It's part 17 of your very long days, and I know the day isn't done yet.
Miigwech,
Thank
you all. Have a great day. Be safe.